and I would like to introduce our next speaker, Archimandrite Father Cyril and Professor Father Cyril Havarun, who is a professor of ecclesiology, international relations, and ecumenism at Sankt Ignatius College at the University College of Stockholm, and he's a director of the Huffington Ecumenical Institute at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. And I'd also like to thank that institute and Father Cyril for financing the overseas travels of most of our speakers. He also helped us to cover some of the accommodations of our very wonderful lineup of speakers. So thank you to Father Cyril for that. Father Cyril is an international fellow at Chester Ronning Center for the Study of Religion and Public Life at the University of Alberta in Canada. He is also an invited professor at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, and he's the guest professor at the Institute of Sino-Christian Studies in Hong Kong. So please welcome Father Cyril, and his paper is entitled The Evolution of Christian Non-Conformism.
Well, thank you, Sister Vasa, for your kind words. It's also a privilege to be here. And when I was coming here to Chicago, I thought, thanks goodness, I will not have to speak about either Putin or Kirill or Trump, as I am doing, well, since recently. Especially about Trump, and actually I see that yes, we are talking about them, but I will not be talking about them in my presentation. So I decided to stick to my decision not to talk about them. Also, I decided not to make any presentation, so I'll be just talking, and I hope you will you could follow me. What I'll be speaking about is somehow consistent with the period we are in Great Land. I'll be speaking about monasticism, very unusually for me to speak about monasticism, but I thought it is appropriate to speak about this when it comes to non-conformism, because I think the main virtue of monasticism is not really not to have sex, but the main virtue is to be non-conformist, to stick to Christ's words that his kingdom is not of this world. However, before speaking about monasticism, we need to go back to the Jewish roots of the Christian non-conformism. Less than a century before Christ was born, Rome had finally conquered Judea. Roman authorities ruled it either through their local proxies, such as the Herodian dynasty, or directly through procurators. The Jews regularly rebelled against Roman rule. Their anti-Roman non-conformism framed the mission of Christ. Many of those who perceived him as the Messiah wanted him to be their king. At the same time, some of those who were against him provoked him to demonstrate his loyalty to the Roman state, to accuse him of treachery. Christ had to disappoint the former and deal with the latter. He made it clear that his kingdom, as I said, is not of this world. At the same time, he urged to give back to Caesar what is Caesar's. Christ effectively made the religion he preached neither confronting nor conforming with politics, but transcending it. He introduced a radical differentiation between religion and politics. Actually, I believe that we can speak about religion and politics as two different things, owing to Christ. What he said was unprecedented for his time. And such a differentiation became a basis for the early Christian non-conformism. And I believe Christ led this non-conformist revolution. He was really a revolutionary in this particular sense of confronting this tradition, a traditional value of the Greek and Roman world, that religion and politics are always together. Christianity emerged during the period when the Roman state turned from republic to empire, something which is usually unnoticed by the church historians. But I think it is important to understand, as a context of the emergence of Christianity, that the republic was becoming an empire. Rome was busy substituting its horizontal republican structures with vertical monarchical ones, while Christianity developed horizontal networks. Well, if you compare Trump's America, well, probably it's something not very dissimilar. Early Christian theologians, particularly Origen, emphasized freedom as the basis of spiritual life. Rome, in contrast, advanced in coercion as its new traditional value. So coercion became really a Roman traditional value. Notwithstanding their differences, the Roman Empire followed the Roman Republic in treating politics and religion as inseparable. From this perspective, Roman society was not different from any ancient society. At the same time, the Republic and the Empire differed in their approach to state-religion relations. In the Republican period, the Roman authorities usually sought public consent for many religious practices. It was not exactly freedom of consciousness in the modern sense, but some sort of freedom regulated by Republican institutions such as the Senate. Imperial Rome, however, demanded from its subjects more conformity in religious matters. It became a rule that monarchs regulated religious beliefs, implementing the principle cuius regio eius religio. Such a role was instituted in the official function of the highest priest, Pontifex Maximus. The Senate usually approved without further question the religious initiatives of a monarch. Religious conformism, thus, became one of the pillars of the Pax Romana. In contrast to Roman conformism, the original Christian attitude to the state was non-conformist. Christianity, at least in its initial intentions, supported the idea of freedom of consciousness, again, to the extent that was imaginable at the time. The freedom was crucial for the survival of Christianity in the Roman Empire. Without the freedom of consciousness, Christianity did not have many chances to compete with the state religion or numerous philosophical schools, which often were also religious sects. The main challenge that early Christians faced, with which they could not find a compromise, was established polytheism and imperial cult. Actually, I came to believe after studying, this imperial cult in the Roman Empire, I came to believe that that was the most important part of the Roman religion. Not polytheism, not believing in many gods, but actually believing in the imperial figure as divine. Gods were optional in this Greco-Roman religion. Emperor was never optional. So it was up to you whether you believe in Zeus, Jupiter, or Vesta, or whomever else you want to believe. Your choice, but it's not your choice when it came to believing in the divine character of the imperial power. So I believe that this imperial cult really constituted the core of the Greco-Roman religion. It was, of course, articulated and imposed by the imperial authorities, and the church primarily confronted this cult more than any other religious tenets. In addition to the imperial cult, the early Christian church faced some other traditional Roman values. I call them, sorry for stealing this term from the Patriarch, and I like to apply it to different contexts. Particularly, it is applicable to the Roman context. And among those traditional Roman values were, for example, patriarchal virility of man and submissive procreativity of women. All women had to give sons, preferably, and unpreferably daughters to their husbands. All men were expected to have an active sexual life as a demonstration of their virility, which was not necessarily confined to the family. Anyways, not having sexual life was very un-Roman. Rome allowed female, but not male virginity, only for the servants of the goddess of health, Vesta. Even the Vestals, however, after their tenure expired, were allowed to have sex. Christians who took lifelong vows of chastity defied the Roman traditional values, which also included treating political authority as divine. Thus, Vestals, through serving their goddess, in contrast to the Christian virgins, served Rome. So Vestals are not exactly as nuns, because the main purpose of the Vestals is to serve Rome more than to serve Vesta. And they became one of the centerpieces of the imperial cult, thus. In contrast to them, early monastics defied the assumed divine character of the imperial authority even after the latter became Christian, as we will see shortly. My point is that even the virtue of virginity, which is associated with the Orthodox monasticism, is not purely ascetical, it's also political. It was a kind of defilement, it was a rejection of the Roman values, imperial values, I mean, the political values of the Roman Empire. Another traditional Roman value which early Christians and early monasticism intended to defy was hierarchism. Roman society was intrinsically hierarchical. Social hierarchies were believed to be embedded in the very human nature, as Aristotle had suggested. So it's a very Aristotelian idea, the ontologization of the social strata, of the social statuses. According to Aristotle's ontology, when someone was a slave, for example, slavery was in this person's nature. That person could not be non-slave. And this ontology became fully materialized in Roman society, which institutionalized social distances as both ontological and juridical. Therefore, when Paul proclaimed, there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is no male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus, his claim was very un-Roman and defied Romans' the most traditional values, because essentially Paul blasted these ontological frameworks that really shaped the Roman society, that were embedded in the Roman society. In the beginning, the church resisted the Roman hierarchism, but eventually gave up and adopted most of it. Although it did not accept the Aristotelian theory behind societal stratifications, it compromised on their practices. As a result, for example, slavery became acceptable by the church. And we know, for example, that even such open-minded and Christian spirits as Gregory of Nazianzus, Gregory the theologian, he had slaves until his death, and only he released his slaves only upon his death, some of them. Some of them, he made them deacons. Since then, probably deacons became almost like slaves.
That's what's behind the deacon.
Right. Anyways, slavery became acceptable by the church in one or another way. Monasticism, however, continued resisting both the theory and practice of Rome's social stratification. In the Egyptian desert, for example, slaves became free and equal with former aristocrats. Therefore, Richard Paul Bajone is right that early monasticism, I quote him, was the most popular and vital lay movement of its day. It was really anti-hierarchical in the beginning. It was really for the lay people, for the value of being just a simple person, just for a person to be him or herself. Eventually, however, the egalitarian ethos became weakened, even in monasticism. Hierarchism gradually became a norm, as it had become a norm earlier in the wider church. Writings of a Syrian monk who called himself Dionysius the Areopagite, whom I really dislike, confirmed the change through a theory that there is a heavenly hierarchy, which the earthly hierarchs must imitate. From a vessel of egalitarianism, monasticism turned to a vessel of hierarchism. Only some rudiments of the former have survived in this vessel. For example, when in the relatively recent past, bishops or even patriarchs retired to Mount Athos, and I mean primarily the patriarchs of Constantinople, but also other churches like Alexandria or Antioch, and they retired to Mount Athos or other communities, monastic communities, they sometimes abstained from performing any sacred service and live there as unordained monks. If you would go, for example, in the 18th century, I studied this Colibatic movement in Greece in the 18th century, and many patriarchs, because the Ottomans, they just switched them all the time. Every 2 years or even more frequently, they had another patriarch. So when they would dump the previous patriarchs, they would go to Mount Athos. It was like a huge dump height, with the patriarchs and metropolitans. And when they went there, they didn't behave as patriarchs. They behaved, well, the best of them behaved as, simple monks, and they didn't even celebrate liturgy. They didn't even, confess people. They just lived as monks there. And that is, I believe, that was like a rudiment of this old anti-hierarchical kind of monastic spirit that still exists on Mount Athos, I believe, together with many other strange things. Early monastic communities were probably the only place where women felt like man, equal to man. In Egypt, which continues to be a very patriarchal society, we should understand that in the time of the emergence of monasticism, Egypt was still very patriarchal. It is still now, but even more it was then. And imagine that in this context of a very rigidly, excruciatingly patriarchal society, monastic communities emerged where all of a sudden women became like men. Unimaginable. And we take it for granted, but think about this. It was not granted, it was not given, it was really a countercultural thing. I believe it was like a continuation of this Christ's non-conformist revolution that he started. In contrast to the larger society in Egypt, Amas enjoyed equal authority with Abbas. Still, modern convents are the only place in the Eastern churches where women may have a sort of hierarchical rank, that of an abbess. At least in the Greek world, the installation of abbesses is similar to the enthronement of hierarchs. They're even allowed to wear pictorial crosses on their chest, as priests do, as Matushka does. And this is exactly a token of this egalitarian spirit in the church that survived through monasticism. In the Roman context, egalitarianism and chastity were closely connected with non-conformism. Together, they constituted the most important features of the early monastic movement. Many Christians who later were called monks adopted an un-Roman lifestyle the un-Roman lifestyle of abstaining from sexual intercourse and treating all human beings equally because they wanted to defy what they regarded as the kingdom of Antichrist. Arguably, for some early monks, defying the Roman lifestyle and mentality was as important as keeping the vows of chastity or obedience. The non-conformist anti-imperial ethos can be seen particularly clearly in the apophthegmata, stories from the Egyptian desert. A story of Abba Moses set an example. Since we are in the Lenten period, let me quote apophthegmata. The governor of a province once heard of Abba Moses, and off he went to Skid to see him. When some folk reported the matter to the elder, he got up to run away into the marsh, but they met him and said, "Tell us, old man, where is Abba Moses' cell?" "What do you want from him?" he said to them. "He is crazy." Well, probably they were not surprised because they knew a lot of crazy monks at the time, so it was not unusual. They were not surprised indeed. And they just, when the governor, the story continues, when the governor came into the church, he said to the clergy, "I'm hearing things about Abba Moses and have come to see him and here an old man who was going into Egypt met us. We said to him, 'Where is Abba Moses' cell?' And he said to us, 'What do you want from him? He's crazy.' The clergy were sad when they heard this. They said, 'What sort of a person was this old man who said these things against the Holy One?' He was elderly, wearing old clothes, stale and black," they said. And the clergy said, "That is Abba Moses. He said those things so he would not meet you." The governor went his way, having reaped a great benefit. Well, can you imagine a normal monk nowadays avoiding a governor, a person with political authority and money in this way? I cannot. And I've seen a lot of them, including myself. I would not avoid such a person. Monk demonstratively ignored and even humiliated imperial officials, in contrast to their contemporary church hierarchs who flirted with them, like in another story from apophthegmata. The blessed Archbishop Theophilus of Alexandria once visited Arsenius together with an official, and he asked the elder if they might hear a saying from him. After remaining silent for a while, the elder answered him, If I say something to you, will you observe it? They agreed to observe it. Then the elder said to them, wherever you hear Arsenius is, do not come near. These stories were conceptualized by Athanasius of Alexandria in the life of Antony, which can be seen as a manifesto of the early monastic non-conformism. As Raymond van Dam noticed, this treatise, and I like this really like this observation, this treatise was written as an implicit response to Eusebius's Life of Constantine. So basically, the latter, Life of Constantine by Eusebius, was a manifesto of Christian non-conformism. Look at our great emperor. He is the model for everyone, for all of us. Athanasius instead promoted Antony as a protagonist of Christian non-conformism. He essentially said like this, look, don't look at this crazy Eusebius and his Constantine. Athanasius had troubles with Constantine's son, Constantius II. And he essentially said, the emperor is not a model. This is the model, Antony. This is what you need to follow. There is a story from the Coptic version of Vita Antoni that counterposes Antony to Constantine very clearly, more clearly than even in the Greek texts, because Copts at that time were quite non-conformist. They retained this non-conformist spirit more than the Byzantine monks. Let me tell you this story again as a Lenten reading from Antony's life, in the description of Athanasius. Antony's fame, even though it's heretical, it's Coptic, don't mind. I joke. Antony's fame reached the emperors. When the Emperor Constantine and Constantius, the evil one, and Constans heard of these things, they wrote to him as our father and asked to receive letters from him. But the letters did not trouble Antony, and he did not rejoice over the emperor's letters, but remained just as he was before the emperors wrote to him. When he received the letters, he summoned the monks and said to them, why are you so amazed that the emperor has written us? He too is a person. Instead, be more amazed that God has written his law for us and has spoken to us through his son. Therefore, Antony did not want to receive the letter, saying, I do not know how to write, which was probably true. The monks encouraged him, saying, they are Christians. Well, they always found the way to explain why they need to appease, the people in authority. Well, they're also Christians. Do not annoy them, so they take offense. Then he allowed the letters to be read, and he wrote to the emperors as their equal. That is the wording from the Coptic life. We don't find the same wording in the Greek life. By telling this story, Athanasius promoted egalitarianism and non-conformism as the two pillars of early monasticism. He stressed the former by presenting Antony as treating the emperors as equal to other Christians, and the latter by emphasizing Antony's refusal even to open the imperial letters, which was very non-conformist, which was really defying the imperial authority. The non-conformist monastic ethos contributed to the church's crisis and helped resolve them. Both, it's just how they use it. Thus, the majority of monastic communities in Egypt and Syria resisted the Chalcedonian orthodoxy, which was enforced by the empire. For them, this orthodoxy was conformism. It was just the opposite to what they believed. The Chalcedonian orthodoxy was conformist, and they considered it as their monastic duty to reject it as polluted by the interference of the state. For this reason, they endorsed anti-Chalcedonians and not Chalcedonians. They called the Chalcedonians Melkites, that is, king's people. To stress their disdain for the Chalcedonian collaborators with the state, the anti-Chalcedonians called their opponents Chalcedonians. And here is my discovery. I made it when I studied the term Chalcedonian, because we call them ourselves Chalcedonians. We say we are Chalcedonians. But the Chalcedonians in the period of Chalcedon never called themselves Chalcedonians. And that really, that was an enigma for me. I couldn't understand why it was so. And then I speculated, and here's my speculation. So indeed, initially the term Chalcedonians in the text that I searched, in Greek, these words are like Chalkidoni or Chalkidonei, meant those from the polis of Chalcedon on the Asian shore of Bosphorus, just opposite to Byzantium. Leontius of Byzantium, for example, referred to the Council of Constantinople in 453 as the one of the Chalcedonians, kata in Chalkidoneon. But by the Chalcedonians, he meant not his fellow Diophysites, but those from the neighborhood across the Bosphorus. Apparently, Leontius used the local word, a sort of slang, by which the dwellers of Chalcedon were known to their neighbors as Chalkidonei. And apparently the Byzantini, the Byzantines, were those who lived on the opposite side of Bosphorus. And as all neighbors, they didn't really trust each other and didn't like each other. And they coined different pejorative terms for each other. So the Byzantines coined this word Chalcedonians for those who dwelt over there, on the other side of Bosphorus. According to the available sources that I looked into, at least, the Chalcedonians, in the sense of Diophysites, did not call themselves Chalcedonians, as I said. In contrast to them, those whom we call anti-Chalcedonians use the word Chalcedonians as a label for us. So it was like a shame at the time to be called a Chalcedonian. And now we enjoy it. We have Syriac sources speaking of the Chalcedonians, literally. At that time, Chalcedon was a relatively small suburb of the capital, Epolis, their city, which implied anything associated with it as small-sized, particular, and secondary to the mainstream, a sort of sidekick. Those were the features that the Miaphysites ascribed to the Diophysites. They were an insignificant party that tried to make their big brother, the court, happy. To be a Chalcedonian to the monastic non-conformists in Egypt and Syria meant to be a sellout, a collaborator. Monastic communities of Upper Egypt, guided by Archimandrite Shenouda the Great, constituted the core of the non-Chalcedonian, anti-Chalcedonian movement. Together with the Archbishop of Alexandria, Cyril, Shenouda had participated in the Council of Ephesus in 431. Later, he allied with Archbishop Dioscoros, and his monasteries became a hotbed of the anti-Chalcedonian resistance in Egypt. His reputation as a holy man, I believe he was more crazy than a holy, but anyways, many people believe he was a holy. Both things are possible, actually. They don't contradict each other. And, I don't speak about the fools for Christ because they were not crazy. They were holy, not crazy. I'm speaking about others who are both holy and crazy. So his reputation as a holy man, as a prophet, contributed to making anti-Chalcedonianism a part of the Coptic psyche and identity. In Palestine, monks revolted against the Bishop of Jerusalem, Juvenal, after he had signed the Chalcedonian Ors. He had to flee from his see to save his life. He was reinstated to his office only with the military support from the government, which added to the non-conformist resentment from the anti-Chalcedonians. In contrast to Egyptian monasticism, the Palestinian monks and nuns did not resist the Chalcedon for long. Soon, most monastic communities around Jerusalem switched to the Diophysite side. To this day, they remain a pro-Chalcedonian enclave among the Syrian anti-Chalcedonian majority. The Chalcedonian party had its own monastic supporters, even if they constituted a minority. In addition to the Palestinian monks, it enlisted Pachomian communities in Egypt and monasteries on the Sinai Peninsula. So it was like a triangle of Chalcedonian monasticism in Sinai. The monastery of sleepless monks in Constantinople became a pillar of this party. This community was established in the 420s. Its founder, Alexander, brought to Constantinople the traditions of Syriac asceticism. He introduced a practice of non-stop worship by rotating groups of monks. From the perspective of the anti-Chalcedonian party, monasticism saved faith from the Chalcedonian compromises with Nestorianism. Since then, monasticism has occupied a central place in the Coptic and Syriac traditions. From the Byzantine perspective, however, monasticism contributed to the chaos and the eventual schism within Eastern Christianity. Probably because of such perception, the Council of Chalcedon tried to discipline monastic communities by placing them under stricter episcopal authority. 3 centuries later, Chalcedonian monasticism contributed to overcoming the iconoclastic crisis. The latter had been caused by a violent interference of the state in the matters of the church and theology. Many hierarchs then confirmed with the interference, but not many monks. With the leading role of the Studian monastery in Constantinople, Byzantine monasticism played a crucial role in rebuking iconoclasm. Icon-worshipping monks were moved by the non-conformist ethos, which St. Athanasius praised in Anthony the Great and other Egyptian monks. A Studite abbot Theodore became particularly famous for his non-conformism. Theodore wanted to plant in Constantinople both the non-conformist ethos and the Cenobitic traditions of Egypt and Palestine. On their basis, he drafted his own rule. This rule became so popular that most monastic communities in the East eventually adopted it. In particular, the Studite rule framed the newly established monastery of Caves in Kiev. From there, it was disseminated through other Slavic monasteries. The Studite monastery played a pivotal role in overcoming iconoclasm. Iconoclasm was a part of the imperial policy aimed at reducing the participation of the church in power sharing and concentrating all power in the hands of the emperors. The Studites, while polemicizing against the iconoclast theology, also defended the share of the church in the Byzantine political system. Eventually, they achieved their goal. They also dramatically increased the prestige of monasticism. Monasticism was redeemed after the havoc of the Chalcedonian period. Late Byzantine Christianity, as a result, became more monastic-centered. For example, the number of bishops from monks dramatically increased. That was the kind of the result of this triumph of monasticism after the crisis of the Chalcedonian period. Eventually, it would become a norm that all Eastern bishops should be monks. Byzantine monasticism after iconoclasm demonstrated its high potential to affect the legitimacy of the emperors. Some of them considered monasteries as a more effective source of political legitimacy than even the official church hierarchy, which to a significant extent had been compromised by collaborating with the iconoclast emperors. So essentially what happened? The state always looked for the sources of legitimacy. The church provided such a source in the beginning, especially the church hierarchs. It was like a resource, but this resource became eventually exhausted. So the vessel of legitimacy, as it were, was drunk up by the emperors to the bottom. It became dry. So the emperors started looking for other sources of legitimacy, and they found this source of legitimacy in monasticism rather than hierarchy. And that is the paradox. The state always needed a source of legitimacy which was not aligned with the state, which was non-conformist. So essentially, non-conformism was like a liquid needed for the state to maintain its legitimacy. And at the same time, the state consumed this source. After consuming this source, they looked for another source. And after the hierarchs, it was monasticism that became the source of legitimacy for the state. And how it happened, how the state essentially drank up the source of legitimacy in monasticism. The later Byzantine emperors began investing in the monasteries more than their predecessors did and expected them to support and boost their legitimacy. They particularly hoped that such a legitimizing role would be played by a relatively new monastic politia located not far from Constantinople on the Chalkidiki Peninsula. It is commonly known as Mount Athos or Holy Mountain. Hermits and small monastic communities had lived there since at least the 9th century. However, Athonite monasticism boomed when emperors endorsed local communities with vast resources and prestigious statuses. The first monastery to receive a special imperial status was the Great Lavra, Mihaly Lavra. It was founded by Emperor Nikephoros Phokas. Other emperors after him continued providing for this and other monasteries which had been established nearby. In return, the Athonite monasticism became royal and loyal to the Byzantine rulers. Even nowadays, these monasteries preserve the most significant treasures and legacies of the Byzantine Empire. Seen from this perspective, however, the Athonite monasticism has departed far from the original monastic non-conformism of the Egyptian desert. Many Athonite monks dream of restoring different empires, Byzantine, Serbian, or Russian. Saint Athanasius and Saint Anthony would be horrified. So I didn't want to make you disappointed because probably some of you became disappointed hearing me praising, the glorious past of monasticism in Byzantium. No, in the end, I became the usual critic of things. So I believe, essentially that the Athonite monasticism, as it emerged on Mount Athos, was envisaged, at least by those who funded it, as the opposite to the original monasticism. It was like the reversal of this non-conformist spirit of the early monasticism. It was the opposite. It was like a substitute for monasticism, essentially. It's a miracle that it continued many of those traditions, of the past. But the original design, was exactly to make it the opposite to what it used to be, in the time of Antony and Syriac and Egyptian monks. And we see how, to some extent, it worked and still works, because monasticism is now, the Athonite, if you go to Mount Athos, if you can, then you will see how many pieces, shards of the empires of the past are there, ossified, venerated as relics. They venerate not just the relics of the saints, they also venerate the relics of the empires, very much. There. Even further from the original monastic ideals did the Russian monasticism depart. Its crisis culminated in the controversy between the already mentioned controversy by Lucy, between the so-called possessors and non-possessors, stяжатели and nestяжатели. The controversy lasted about a century, from the 1480s through the 1880s, approximately, and epicentered into monasteries Volodsky and Belozersky. The possessors, led by Joseph of Polotsk, argued that monasteries, to fulfill their mission, better can and should have possessions, lands, villages, and slaves. The opponents, as it was mentioned by Lucy, led by Neil of Sora, strongly disagreed. This controversy was effectively, I believe, about whether monasticism should be conformist or non-conformist. So I put it again in these terms of conformism. The conformist faction of Joseph won and thus shaped the Russian monastic tradition for centuries. So it was not just about possessions for centuries. It was not just about church lands. It's about the attitude to the state, that it should be conforming. And this tradition, which won, reached its highest point in supporting Putin's wars, I believe. And if you look at the situation nowadays, look at Optina, which is a sort of amalgamation of the spiritual revival after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when so many hopes were that Optina would be really like the engine of the spiritual renewal in Russia. Now we read news about how the monks from Optina would go to the front line and help, the Russian soldiers, killing people there. That is now their main business. To support this war. And take the recently departed starets Ili Nozdrin. This is kind of a Christomatic example of a person who demonstrated his complete conformism. Well, some people try to justify him that he was out of his mind. He had dementia and, but I don't observe him in any point of his life when he was really very much different from this conformist line. And I don't want to blame poor starets. He's now in God's hands, and he has his own judgment. Who are we to judge? But what we need, I think, to understand is throughout its entire history, Eastern monasticism evolved. That was the point of my presentation, the evolution from a very non-conformist standpoint to kind of the pioneer, the protagonist of conformism in modern life. Another note, it's about self-justification. Throughout its entire history, Eastern monasticism featured three main lifestyles. In addition to anachoretism and communal monasticism mentioned earlier, there was always a third way of monastic life. This vita tertia of monasticism often changed forms and names and was often under the fire of criticism and sanctions by the church. Nevertheless, it has always survived and continues to be practiced today. In Egypt, such monks lived in tiny communities in separate households. They decided for themselves how they wanted to live. Clusters of such small communities were called lavras. In modern Eastern monasticism, this lifestyle became known as idiorhythmia. I remember when I studied in Greece, I was always very much against idiorhythmia for cenobitic life. And I just went in line with all others. There was kind of monastic revival on Mount Athos, and everyone accused idiorhythmia and made jokes about idiorhythmic monks. Now I reconsider it. So indeed, idiorhythmic monks live in communities yet enjoy significant individuals' autonomy. They may have their possessions be paid by the monastery for their services, buy their food, and eat on their own. Until recently, idiorhythmic monasteries constitute a majority of the Athonite communities. After these monasteries converted to cenobia, the idiorhythmic lifestyle was preserved in sketes. The Athonite sketes even now follow a middle path between cenobitic monasteries and anachorites keliots. Monks in the sketes live in small communities under the guidance of an elder. These communities take care of themselves. They participate in the common liturgy on Sundays and feast together with other communities of the skete. In the Christian East, these were always monks who constantly moved from place to place. They sometimes were called voski, herdsmen, or the ones who eat herbs. Sozomen, the church historian, described this sort of monks in Syria. Let me quote him. When they first entered upon the ascetic mode of life, they were denominated shepherds, because they had no houses, ate neither bread nor meat, and drank no wine, but dwelt constantly on the mountains and passed their time in praising God by prayers and hymns, according to the canons of the church. At the usual hours of meals, they each took a sickle and cut some grass on the mountains, and this served for their repast. Such was their course of life. Wandering monks continue browsing through the cities and villages until our days. Some of them have become famous, such as Cosmas Etolos, or the anonymous Russian pilgrim who lived in the mid-19th century and composed the influential book, The Way of a Pilgrim, candid tales of a wanderer to his spiritual father. Excuse me. Some monks on Mount Athos, after having stayed for some time in one hut, Kaliva, would burn it and move to another one. They do so to avoid attaching to one place and became known as Kapsukalivites, the ones who burned their huts. In the Soviet era, when most monasteries were closed, most monks lived at home or wandered. Some of them educated people in religion, and some disseminated controversial ideas. There were quite a lot of crazy people among them as well. In Eastern Christianity, there were always monks who did not want to live in an organized way. They often loitered in big cities looking for alms and scandalizing local people with their behavior and teaching. The church repeatedly adopted measures to discipline them without much success. At the same time, unorganized monks had more freedom than established ones to follow the original call of the monastic movement, to be non-conformist and countercultural. That is a self-apology, because I feel I belong to the same sort of monks, just as Sister Vassa is, I believe. And this is a sort of apology why we are like that. We are also like Voski. Of course, we don't eat grass. We eat all sorts of things. But I believe it's important for a monk or a nun to be countercultural and non-conformist more than anything else. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you very much, Father Cyril, for that provocative talk. I find it very invigorating and very much speaking to our topic, this basic underlining of freedom. And for me, when I'm listening to your talk, it's it becomes clear actually that it's about freedom, the vows of, chastity and poverty also, that they're freeing, and the obedience is also partly to be free of the obedience to authorities that are political or financial. And I also envisioned this conference as a reflection really on the value of freedom. The non-conformism is about, the extent to which we value and are able to embrace freedom. So anyway, what's happening next is we have some time to ask questions of Father Cyril or comment on this very interesting topic. We have about, 15 to 20 minutes. Then what we have on the schedule is a light dinner. And for the folks at home, both of you, we after the light dinner, we do have a very interesting panel discussion. All right. So the floor is open to questions, comments for Father Cyril.
I think Scott was first.
So one just absolutely technical footnote, but that's what I do, to both you and Lucy, which is that the most recent scholarship on Joseph Volokolomsky and Nostorsky is actually, they were not opponents. They viewed each other's work as complementary and valued one another. And that it was only in sort of the subsequent generation that the controversy really happened. And a lot of that had to do because of the state's interference, right?
But we belong to this posterior generation, don't we?
Yeah, definitely. My question is exactly following up on Sister Rosa's comment, which is, thank you for the wonderful talk, by the way. Really gives me a lot to think about, having spent a lot of my early career working on monasticism. I totally understand the idea of it not conforming with the world, but at the same time, especially with like Pachomius and so on, this value of obedience. So how do we understand the relationship between obedience and non-conformism?
Yeah, well, excellent point. I believe both non-conformism and obedience are just instruments, effectively. They are not the ends in themselves. They are not the kind of deities of monasticism that every monk is supposed to, to worship. They're just instruments that can help the spiritual perfection. At the same time, as instruments, as any instrumental things, they can harm. They can lead away from the original goal, of those instruments. So that's how we have this guruism and abuses of obedience. Because when obedience is perceived as end in itself, then it easily slips to be abusive, to lead actually to a sort of idolatry. The same is, I'm not super enthusiastic about non-conformism. I believe it can lead to abuses as well. It can produce madness. It can make people crazy, and not really, it can lead to sociopathy. People can become sociopaths in the end. I mean, among the monks, it's another side of non-conformism. That's why. That's why we need to apply what has been called discernment, рассуждение, like the spiritual discernment, which is the way to keep us away from the abuses of all those instruments, including non-conformism or obedience. At the same time, it teaches us to use it wisely.
I have a related question, and I will qualify it by assuring everybody that since you're very dear friends, it's quite clear where my heart lies in prefacing that question. But I wanted you to address one of the challenges that are often leveled, and it's related to what you and Scott were talking about, that is very often leveled at the monastics who live and minister and practice and function outside of some form of monastic communities. Yeah. Now, where I find this interesting in the context of orthodoxy is that, who are always far behind the Western world, you know, in the Catholic Church, for example, or in the Anglican Church, the notion of monastics in the world and their ministries is very normal.
Yeah.
Right? In the Orthodox Church, it's still quite controversial. Even, you know, Mother Maria Skoptsova, who's canonized by Constantinople, is a huge anomaly, and as you know, is a controversial figure for some. And one of the things that's happening around this is that there is an enormous proliferation of, especially with the internet, of the you know, solo independent teachers. And of course, you know, present company included, this criticism is always thrown at everybody sort of wholesale, right? That you're not part of a structure, you're not part of a system of
So therefore, who are you to teach us?
You're not part of the system of some kind of a structure of accountability, and who are you to teach? And I think the reason I brought up the Western precedent is how do you see this can be normalized within the Orthodox context?
Well, I believe there is a parallel. I believe that this sort of monasticism of monks living and nuns living outside the communities, it's pretty much like homosexualism, which is widely spread but not acknowledged and blamed.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, should be. I mean, I'm speaking not about homosexualism now. I'm speaking about the monks and nuns. Well, should we really normalize it? Don't care. I mean, is it so important? Is it kind of existential important? I don't think so. After all, it's helpful for your own humility. I mean, my own humility, to feel like not quite normal. It's all right. It helps me spiritually. So why should I fight it?
I think Athanasius of Mount Athos required 10 years within the Cenobitic community at the Great Lavada before allowing any monk to
to a hermit as hermits.
Yeah.
That is a sort of regulation. They always try to impose those regulations, and they never worked. It's starting with the Council of Trullo, and even before that, Chalcedon. They all try to put like monastic movement into an order. It never worked.
I don't think it's a matter of trying to regulate it in a specific sense, but rather the idea of making sure that the monk was well grounded spiritually before he went off.
That's true. But again,
he did not have the guidance and the community around.
Well, this is the normal. But again, the reality on Mount Athos is that a lot of monks would go straight to hermitages without this stage of of preparation in Cenobia. And again, until the 80s, basically, there were practically no cenobias on Mount Athos. There were only in the Idiorythmic monasteries. Monks did not have where to go, like if they wanted cenobia. It was only the only option which was available is to go either to those crazy keliots, or to go to the skids to live, or to go to the Idiorythmic monasteries, which provided really like, okay, work for us, we give you food, and that's it. That's the only thing we need from you. So this is a very new thing that they require like 10 years in cenobia. And again,
no, Athanasius. This is hundreds.
Well, yes.
The beginning of
I believe that even at that time it didn't work as it doesn't work nowadays. It was like a wishful thinking, something they wanted monks to do. I think that given this insistence of the church to impose those rules repeatedly, it means that it always failed.
Yeah. But that wasn't the church. That wasn't coming from bishops or anything. That was coming from the leader of a monastic community who wanted to ensure that somebody didn't just come into the community and immediately leave it without, being mature enough.
Well, again, as a sort of intended rule, it was imposed, but rules didn't work and don't work even nowadays. That's what I believe. That's what I
You know,
conclude from my studies.
You know, what this is making me think about, in the context of non-conformity, and conformity, is that, if there is a model, a healthy model of church, it should be, flexible enough to allow for various forms of personal, spiritual
Yeah.
formation. I hate the word spiritual, I'm sorry, that's why I hesitated. This personal formation.
Yeah.
And so thank you for highlighting all these
Yeah.
various things, but the same applies, the same criteria should apply to the laity and and clergy. Different people have different tempers that are suited different lives, really.
Yeah. Even, I agree. The only thing I doubt about is that there could be a healthy model of the church.
No,
I studied the church. Well, that's my kind of main field, and I realized eventually there is no such a thing
well,
as
people screw up
a model.
everything,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's a given.
Yeah. Especially the Orthodox Christians. Yes, please.
Précise, Dessay, the French scholar and writer on monastic life, I believe it's in his introduction to his French translation of the Ladder of Divine Descent, presents the theory that his particular point of view, I suppose, that monasticism in the Christian church took the place, played the role of prophets in the Old Testament church.
Yeah.
That the intention was that they be the truth shall set you free.
Right.
That this was supposed to be the free voice of the church.
Absolutely.
And the non-conformist element, the non-conformist movement.
Yeah, exactly. The only thing, again, as any institution can be abused, therefore, prophets turn into false prophets sometimes. But again, it doesn't mean the existence of the false prophets doesn't mean that everyone is a false prophet.
Right.
Sometimes that we tend to, to generalize.
I want to know something that's bothered me ever since I started reading Dostoevsky and Brothers Karamazov.
I hate him as much as I hate Dionysius. Yeah.
But the character of Zosima,
Yeah.
I mean, this doesn't just apply to Russia. Maybe it applies like to many other countries where people talk to monks and to nuns about problems that they have. And I think, about raising children or things that the monk and the nun have never encountered in their own lives. And
Which doesn't mean that they don't think about that.
No, of course not.
They do, and they know therefore a lot of things. They believe they don't.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, no, it's just, I sometimes wonder, how do you kind of, if you haven't experienced things personally, like, a difficult marriage, a sexual relationship, and people come to you, and they're very desperate for some kind of answers. How do you kind of research this stuff?
Yeah, good question.
How do you find out about
Just
all
guesswork,
these
I believe.
problems?
People really spoil priests because, we blame priests and gurus. We say, they play this role of guru, but how they started, how they began to become gurus in the first place. I think it started with the people actually demanding them to play a role of guru. They spoil the priest, and then the priests kind of come to like it, and they continue carry on, playing this role. That's why, maybe the best. It's like with what we call pomosly, logismi. First they approach you, and at the early stage you need to say no to them, right? You need to not to consent with them. This applies not just to pomosly, I believe this logismi, but also applies to those people who come to you with the questions that you can't answer. Just say no. I don't know.
The voice of experience here. Most people just want to be heard.
Right.
They don't necessarily want an answer. 90% of the people just want to be heard.
Empathy.
And it's true that monastics often have the time and the opportunity to do that.
To be very patient.
Secondly, I remember when I came to the monastery as a young nun, the abbot said to me, "You're going to hear things and experience things that you would have never even thought of in the world." How can this be? And it's true, because so many different people with so many different problems do approach it. You do end up hearing these absolutely incredible stories that, granted, it's not personal experience, but you do have a much wider range of these stories of resources, let's say, that sort of a person can draw on. That's just.
Yeah, I agree, and this point I agree with late Archbishop Всеволод Majdansky. He used to repeat. He worked before he became like a clergy person. He was a psychotherapist. He said that I'm psychotherapist, and he said that the most important, and actually he served the kind of dysfunctional Jewish families as a specialist. So he had a lot of experience, how to deal. And his main advice was, don't talk, listen to people. That's what they need. That's what the best psychotherapists do. They just listen.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes people like that you have no idea about what they're talking about, because that's like, you're totally
It seems
impartial.
like a completely
But that-
objective sort of.
That frees them up to speak more candidly.
Because you're free of their entanglements.
Yeah.
Actually, as a completely non-monastic but first-hand experience, being a webmaster for the parish for many, many years, I cannot tell you what kinds of things people write to the Ask the Priest section. And I would agree with Matushka Efrosinia that 90% of these pouring out of all kinds of stories and dysfunction and craziness and tragedy is that they're actually not asking any questions.
They make statements, or just.
They just need somebody to acknowledge that they exist with all their.
Like I'm doing to you right now.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, I agree. Yes, I'm listening. Yes, please.
Just one comment about this discussion, and thank you for the question. But one time we went and spoke to a monastic about asking about marriage questions, and he said, "Well, I'm not married." He said, "But I can recommend a good priest that is." So, sometimes they might do that, and I was actually kind of impressed by that, though. It was Father Braga, who everybody knows in the Romanian monastery, and I'm sure that he could have said many wise things to us, but I thought that was a wise thing that he said also, and he did send us to a wonderful priest. But my question for you is, at the very end of your presentation, you said, this explains who Sister Baza and I are, or you are.
Yeah.
And I didn't catch what that was.
Well, to
What do you
be
call that?
like via tertia, the third way.
Oh, the third way.
Right, yes, meaning that we are free to invent ourselves what we want to.
And what is that called?
Let's coin it. Can we do it?
I baptized
Right.
us.
So I can just say, well, you guys are just like the third way, and everybody knows
Yes,
what that is.
yes. Well, you can use
They will.
the original term for that was ski, which means those who graze, on the pasture.
Thanks a lot.
The Alps and the big cities.
Oh, big crazy.
Right.
So what was that word you said? The what?
Boski.
How do
Yeah.
you spell that?
It's in Greek. I mean the modern Greek. It's VOSKOO.
Just like it sounds.
VASSA. Great, thank you. So we have, after this wonderful talk, and we can continue to discuss it. Thank you to Father Cyril. So we're having a light dinner.